Good afternoon. My name is Rudy Marcosi. I'm the Dean of the Performing Arts College at Roosevelt University. It is my pleasure to welcome you to this panel discussion as part of the American Dream Conference. Music, particularly song, has always been a powerful means of expression in all ages and across all cultures. It is primordial. It's built into each of us. Also built into each of us is a powerful drive for community and belonging. In performance, these two forces converge and ally with each other to become a powerful expressive force, almost magical or mystical, capable of unifying diverse groups of people and giving voice to their message that might otherwise go unheard. Today's panel will explore the impact that song and musicians have played in the ongoing struggle for civil rights. It is my pleasure to introduce to you the moderator of tonight's panel, Richard Steele, known to many of us from his 47-year career in Chicago broadcasting at both WBEZ and WTTW. Mr. Steele, thank you.
And about 1,000 stations in between. Welcome. We're going to have this discussion, and we hope that you will enjoy what we're going to talk about. I will introduce you to our panelists. Maggie Brown, vocal artist, edutainer. She'll explain that later. More specifically, Maggie is a spoken word artist, actress, music producer. She uses music to educate. Edutainment is a word she got from her dad, the late Oscar Brown Jr., a Chicago music icon who was a composer, performer, and social activist. Maggie also does a one-woman show called Legacy, in which she demonstrates and narrates the history of African-American music and jazz. She's currently working on a video project called The Great Migration Project. Maggie Brown.
Thank you.
Ramsey Lewis. I met him when I was 3 years old. Extraordinary jazz pianist, composer, and radio personality, which was a little scary for me when he first started doing radio. I said, you know, maybe I'm going to go play piano, and that didn't work out. He's recorded over 80 albums, multiple gold records, and 3 Grammys. Ramsey Lewis has been giving us great performances and recordings for over 6 decades. He's also artistic director of jazz at Ravinia, also helped organize the Ravinia Jazz Mentor Program for young musicians, and Ramsey has a syndicated radio show called Legends of Jazz that I believe still airs on WDCB, I think.
No.
90.9?
It's outside the United States. I mean, outside Chicago, but not Chicago.
But it's still airing?
Yeah.
Okay, it's called Legends of Jazz. He also did a television show that had the same name, television show on PBS, which was a great show. Ramsey Lewis.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
Paul Wertico, Associate Professor of Jazz Studies, Chicago College of Performing Arts, Roosevelt University. He's a jazz percussionist who spent nearly 20 years with the innovative Pat Metheny Group. He won multiple Grammys while working with this guitar-led ensemble, receiving several gold records. We met during his time with Chicago jazz vocalist Kurt Elling many years back. Paul was also part of the guitarist Larry Coryell's trio until Mr. Coryell passed last year. Paul Wertico.
Yay!
Okay, so let me get right into this, and God, you guys look so serious. Is it okay? God, so serious, you know.
All goes towards the front.
So, the song that the song most associated, and we'll talk about a number of recordings, but the song most associated with civil rights, the civil rights movement of the 60s that we think about was "We Shall Overcome." Folk singer Joan Baez led 300,000 people singing it at the March on Washington, and Dr. King's funeral, 50 to 100,000 people who marched from Ebenezer Baptist Church to Morehouse. At the end of the march, they sang "We Shall Overcome." Major song for the civil rights movement. I think Pete Seeger recorded it in about 1946 or so, first time it was actually recorded. But my question to everybody is about that song. I want to start there in relationship to what is it about that music that caused so many people to attach themselves to it? Is it from a musician standpoint and from a human standpoint? Was it the lyrics, the melody, the religious aspect of it, the fact that people could sing it in unison and get that feeling about it? What do you think, Ramsey?
Well, I think it was all of that. I think the fact that it was a simple melody, first of all, and the words carried a message that everybody felt. And it was indicative of the times that we lived in. And all periods of movement that changed society had some song associated with it. And it was a song that, whether you're black, white, whatever color you were, you could identify with it, and it would express your feelings about that movement. It just wasn't a song for black people. It just wasn't a song for white people. It was a song about the times that we lived in at that time. Well, I was there too. And the fact that we shall overcome, we knew there was going to be a brighter day.
Mm-hmm. The fact that it had hope, the feeling of hope to me in coming together with other people focused on that and feeling that and it's kind of like faith is that untangible thing. But I think singing together that way, like you say, in that simple, almost drone way that's almost like chanting, that it focuses and can galvanize people.
And I think too that it's applicable not only in that time, I know we're talking about that time, but even the time today. There are issues and people out there that we will overcome.
Yeah, and it started out as a hymn written in 1900, but then in 1947 it was used as a union movement song. Mm-hmm. So then it was adapted later on.
A union movement, you said? First, originally, okay.
I think there was a strike in Alabama. Mm. There was a black woman who knew the song, and she was leading these strikers in singing this song. It goes back to 1946. It became part of the movement in the 40s, and as you pointed out, Ramsey, it doesn't matter what color. Pete Seeger is a white folk artist who actually, brought it to the fore, and it was taught to him by somebody else who also happened to be white. And I think the story was there was a SNCC conference, the organization SNCC back in the day, and somebody had heard it and asked if he would teach it to them. And from then, you're talking about from the 60s on, that became like, that was the song, We Shall Overcome. Mm-hmm. I do want to go on, I want to mention this very briefly, not to give jazz short shrift, but there was some songs that had, some productions that had an impact overall in terms of the content and the direction. 1959, there was a recording, an album called Fables of Faubus by bassist Charles Mingus. And that was in response to Governor Orville Faubus in 1957, who blocked black students from going to high school in Little Rock. In 1960, We Insist Freedom Now Suite, Max Roach with Abby Lincoln, and your dad, Oscar Brown Jr., wrote the music. Co-wrote the music.
Yeah, well, he would have been lyricist, and Max's music and Abby's vocals.
And then in 1963, John Coltrane did a piece called Alabama. And Alabama was in response to the Birmingham church bombing, where the Klan bombed the church and 4 little girls were killed. And so there was a response from the jazz community. I just wonder what you guys think about how do you think record companies responded to that? This was a pretty aggressive move during those years, and record companies tend to generally, as Ramsey, as you well know, they kind of say, I don't know if we want to do that, you know what I mean? But it had an effect, and it made a statement from people in the jazz community. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, generally, record companies want to look at their bottom line before they make a move. And, but I think because of the artists having such strong feelings, and because that which is going on in the country, record companies had to give in to certain artists, especially jazz artists, who can be very stubborn when it comes to here's what I want to do. And many jazz artists didn't set out to be the Beatles or
For that pop
pop
kind of thing, but
and jazz artists always wanted to communicate to people that were their fans, and so that's how back in that day Coltrane and others did these pieces to say, yeah, I'll stand up and be counted.
Well, originally Mingus was on Columbia on the record. They wouldn't release it with lyrics. So
Right,
then he ended up releasing it
at a
on
later
Candid
point.
with Mingus Presents Mingus when he actually put the words in.
Right.
So he went around the record label.
The Mingus record we're talking about, Charles Mingus was a jazz bass player. When the record was initially released, they wouldn't release it with lyrics or words that were written because they felt it was too controversial. So at a later point, he re-released it with the actual.
Paul, you said this was on Columbia?
He was on Columbia on that record, but then he went to Candid.
When would that have been?
So that
Columbia wouldn't release it.
Yeah.
Wouldn't release it.
Would that have
so it was released in
360?
'60 on Candid.
It was released finally in 60.
Yeah, on,
Right.
on,
Oh, the
Candid, on
reason
the
I-
Candid label under Mingus Presents Mingus, a different record.
Because the reason I asked is, you know, my father recorded on Columbia Records. His first 3 or 4 albums were on it. And you figure that might have been end of 59, top of 60s, right? And he was recording stuff like Bitterman and, you know, some of that stuff. So some of it got across. And it was interesting, like, I don't know, there was, of course, a different kind of relationship between A&R people. And I don't know, sometimes people making decisions about what comes out. Because, he later in the 70s, he released, on a different label, Atlantic, he released Lone Ranger, and they removed it from the radio station.
Yeah.
So sometimes things got past them, is
Yeah,
I guess what I'm saying.
Sometimes.
Yeah, let me think. I mean, I'm pretty sure it's Columbia. It could have been Atlantic, too. He was on a lot of different labels, but I just remembered that whatever label wouldn't let him do it, so then he had to release it on this smaller label.
Just by the way, as a quick sidebar, the Strange Fruit record by Billie Holiday in 1939, that was, you know, it was, I'm sure many of you know, it was citing the awful thing that was happening in the South where blacks were being lynched on a regular basis. Well, Ahmet Ertegun, I read this, I don't know if it's true or not. Ahmet Ertegun was the co-founder of Atlantic Records, and he made a statement that he felt that like that record was sort of the beginning of you know, the social civil rights movement.
Okay.
How many of you all are aware of Billie Holiday's Strange Fruit?
Okay.
Okay, part of the fabric. That's a good thing, part of the fabric.
All right.
Yes.
I want to move on to the 60s and beyond, and there's a lot of music happened during that period. And I'm just going to throw some tunes out there, and we're going to reflect on how that music impacted. I think, from my perspective, and I could be wrong about this, I think some of these songs were songs of optimism. In 1963, Sam Cooke had a recording called "A Change Is Gonna Come." Optimism. 1964 or so, I think Bob Dylan, "Times Are Changing." Ramsey's piece, "Wade in the Water," was 1966. Curtis Mayfield, whose songs were practically an anthem for the civil rights movement. In the 1964, it was "Keep on Pushing." 1965, "People Get Ready." And 1967, "We're a Winner." And Aretha's "Respect," which everybody's been talking about since she passed away. Those were songs that, for the most part, were songs of optimism. Talk a little bit about those songs and what they meant to the movement at that point and how people attached. These were commercially successful songs that people connected the commercial aspect of it and went out and bought the record, but they also connected with the movement itself. So reflect on that for a minute. Maggie?
Oh, it's on me? Well, I was thinking of course, yeah, there were those who, you know, they kind of maybe, I don't know that they consciously were like taking a knee, so to speak, you know, at that time, but or just feeling it and not knowing that these songs would represent leadership in the ways that we're discussing right now, right? In terms of how art can lead a movement, how art and artistic expression can help kind of focus people around what the issue is, you know? and get everybody singing on the same tune and on the one. And that's what's very important, I think, for the success of any movement.
Because if you have a song like We're a Winner, I mean, that's kind of right in there, you know?
Yeah, Daddy would always close his show with something called Brother, Where Are You? And just, you know, making that call and suggesting that we be more humane and more brotherly. And, you know, everybody really is for that.
Brother, Where Are You was a very powerful piece of music.
Yes, it was, yeah.
Yeah. What about that, Ramsey, in terms of
Brown Baby, all that stuff.
you know, those kinds of songs during that period, which were commercial hits, and a lot of people bought the records, but also, you know, I guess subliminally there was that, and sometimes not so subliminally, you know what I'm saying.
Yeah, subliminally.
But the message was there, especially reflecting back on Sam Cooke's A Change Is Gonna Come. And at that point, you know, people often wonder, well, did he really kind of see that, you know, in terms of the music? Because the music was so powerful for that time. And it tied, this is 1963, and it tied right in. So
Well,
these songs that I've mentioned, in terms of their impact.
Yeah, well, a lot of people knew what they were buying and what it represented, but then there were others that bought it because the song felt good or you could dance to it. The message didn't always come through why and what it was meant to be. Like Wade in the Water, I don't know, to this day there's a lot of people that didn't understand that that's a message to slaves getting away from the white master, and that's a slave signal from somebody up north telling them to cross the river. When you get here, cross the river, wade in the water.
So the dogs
The other
can't
part of that
catch
too
a
was
scent.
to keep the sense of the dogs that were trying to find the slaves, to go through the water to keep the, did you all know that?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Many did.
That was part of the message.
Exactly.
Wade in the water. You keep the sense from the, you know, away from the dogs, all of that. So yeah, what about that, Paul?
Yeah, well, some of those songs, I was 10 years old when they came out. So I just loved the music at that point.
Right.
And so the message came to me later as I became aware of my surroundings and what the real world was about. And so that's one of the things. Sometimes with songs that are real powerful, some people really get it, and then other people, it just goes right by them. They don't understand the meaning of the words. Sometimes they don't understand the words themselves. That's why people make up words if they don't understand it, if it's pronounced a weird way, and they're still happy with it. But for me, that's probably why I became a musician. You know, I grew up in Marquette Park, which was the home of the Nazis. That's where the American Nazi Party was, where Martin Luther King actually marched and said he thought he saw segregation and hatred in the South until he came to Marquette Park. And then I moved out to Cary, Illinois, and so it was all white. I had no black friends at all, but I loved the music. And I think the music was what carried me into becoming who I am now.
Look at that. That's really key and deep, you know what I mean? For a person who maybe has never had any exposure to people of another race, they can vibe with their music. They can, you know, and that can work in another way too. A person that was only around black people that could, you know, love, who did you mention? You know, some folk music, Joan Baez or whomever. That, you know, music is such a connecting force that doesn't see color, thank goodness, you know. It
has that power.
Yeah.
Yeah, and even the message of respect. Otis Redding wrote that. And then it was popular, but now it's popular until Aretha recorded and changed the lyrics to more about being about a woman. So
right, it was more
sometimes you have to find a
female
target.
Empowering more so than the movement. The movement just took it on, you know, as we do sometimes.
And
or people
adopted
take
it,
on.
just made it
adopted it,
theirs.
exactly. Lift Every Voice and Sing. Now that was more like the 1900s. It was way before this, but still. Did you know that Lift Every Voice and Sing was really a poem by one of the Johnson brothers? So there was James Weldon and John Rosamond Johnson, right? And so one brother had written the poem for this event down in Florida where they were celebrating Lincoln's birthday, and Booker T. Washington was a special guest. They taught it to 500 school children, taught this poem and recited it on this great day. And then later, one of the other brother who was a musician, he put music to it. Yeah. And then those cats went away. I didn't even know that way back then black people would like go to New York and make music for Broadway, but they were in the early 1900s. They went away, and when they came back to the South, their song had been pasted into most of the hymnals in the Southern churches and things, and it just became an anthem, you know. And Lift Every Voice and Sing, it says, stony the road we trod, the second verse, the one that people don't usually sing. Stony the road we trod, bitter the chastening rod, felt in the days when hope unborn had died. Yet with a steady beat, have not our weary feet come to the place for which our Father sighed. And when I would teach children in music, and you know, we talk about this song and teach them the song, and just to reflect on what the ancestors were going through and dealing with, like hope unborn had died. Let that marinate for a moment. Hope unborn had died. Before it even had the nerve to be born, there wasn't even any reason to hope based on what the laws of the land were and the whole horrible injustice that Billie Holiday spoke about of the lynchings and everything. There was really no reason to hope, but that's what they did. And they sang the song, and they sang it together, and found an occasion to come together and do that long enough to you know, keep their eyes on the prize. They couldn't see, they didn't know our names, but they knew it would be better for us. They knew it would be better for future generations. So yeah, it's a beautiful thing to be able to have a song, you know, that moves people to want to be, again, more humane.
See, I promised you that you'd find out what edutainment was. There it is. You know what I mean? So I want to move on to, as our clock is ticking, on the next era of songs. And this is an era when songs became a little more militant, you know, beyond the We Shall Overcome. 1968, James Brown said louder.
I'm black and I'm proud.
I'm black and I'm proud. 1969, Sly Stone, Everyday People, Stand, those songs were really directly sending a message. 1964, real direct message. Nina Simone, Mississippi,
Mississippi,
Goddamn.
I was thinking of her earlier, yeah.
1972, Staple Singers, If You're Ready, Come Go With Me, I'll Take You There. Two songs.
Respect yourself. Nah,
Yeah.
nah, nah.
Shy Lights, Give More Power to the People. These are songs that directly speak to the issues. Marvin Gaye's What's Going On, kind of, it's amazing how that song was written, and today, everything in that song is still applicable today. Marvin Gaye's What's Going On.
It's true.
Interesting about that song, too, is when I interviewed Berry Gordy one time when he had his book out a few years ago, and I had heard the story that he didn't want to release that, and he said he didn't. He didn't want to go there. He didn't want to do social justice stuff. It's Marvin, you're a love man, you don't want to go there. And he really fought getting that released. I mean, he not fought because he ran the company, but he said, okay, we'll release the thing.
Reluctantly, huh?
He said that so I said, well, you know, you used to pick all those hits. He said, every now and then I was wrong occasionally. It's probably the biggest selling record that Motown ever had, and continues to sell.
People use it and sample it and remix it, yeah.
So this is a different era. Isley Brothers, Fight the Power, McFadden and Whitehead, Ain't No Stopping Us Now, and all those songs. And one of my favorites, Gil Scott-Heron, The Revolution Will Not Be Televised. Revolution will be live. So let's talk about that for a minute. In that era where it changed from, I mean, it was additional music that was more aggressive and kind of in your face about what needs to happen now.
You know, it took time for black people to be proud that they were black, because we had been brainwashed into y'all ain't nothing. You know, y'all gonna get back there in the back of that bus. You know, y'all go over there, y'all this, y'all that.
Don't look up, don't speak, don't read.
Yeah, you know. And so finally we had to deal with ourselves and talk to each other about who we are we really? And we dealt with us. And that's when we came out of this I am somebody, and we came into I am somebody. And that spawned all these songs. And we needed those songs to spawn that movement.
That's vibration. Because this is a vibe right now. I'm not trying to jump ahead, but good Lord. This is a vibe that's happening right now, and it's very different from the vibe we're talking about in any of those eras, 60s, 70s, even the 80s, when we started getting funky and all that stuff, whatever, you know, and expressing ourselves. Because I don't know if you want to touch on that Parliament and them, you know, they were saying some deep stuff. One Nation Under a Groove.
One Nation Under a Groove, yeah. There was,
you know, this is your chance to dance out of your constrictions. You
but
know,
there was a lot of music that came out during that era that combined the rhythmic aspect of it and the message at the same time. You know, as you point out, Ramsey, record companies, they want you to sell some records. I mean, that's the bottom line. It's a business. But it's also interesting how the music industry itself had sort of gotten the message about that's what's happening now in the street, because people were buying those. So yes, I mean, for the rhythm, but also the fact that, I mean, the Isley Brothers record, Fight the Power, there was a big discussion. There's a line in there where they say, with all this bullshit going down. All right, so stations said, well, we can't put that on, but some stations did put it without that.
Without the beat?
Yeah, without the beat, you know what I mean? And it was a big record. I think Ernie Isley wrote that, and he said they were listening to the radio about, and this is the other thing, some of these things come about because of current events. James Brown's manager said that there was something on the news that James Brown saw one evening after a performance, and it was a racial incident, and it had to do with him being inspired to write Say It Loud, I'm Black and Proud. So there was a connection in terms of, you know, like some social responsibility during that period. But the music then was taking a different turn at that point. It was becoming more, you know, it didn't abandon the other music, but it was like the next step forward.
And don't forget to connect R&B, blues first,
Right.
R&B,
Right.
and then rock and roll. No R&B, rhythm and blues. No blues, no R&B.
No rock.
No R&B, no rock and roll. So that's another instance of black culture influencing the American culture. So a lot of people back in that day took issue with, well, they can take our music and let certain people record it, but we're still not good enough to sit in the back and in the front of the bus. And we had to overcome, here we are, we shall overcome. We had to overcome a lot of that because we had been brainwashed as a people. And music helped us deal with it. And you would feel that once our music began influencing the masses, and at that time the masses were white people, and once our music started influencing them, and you know, there was a big hullabaloo because I forgot his name, but he was just gonna call, when white people started recording this music, he was just gonna call it R&B, because it was R&B. But the record companies said, no, we can't do that because they have that. But what are we gonna call it? Well, who's this disc jockey in Cleveland, Ohio?
Alan Freed
Alan Freed.
came up with rock and roll.
He came up and said, well, why don't you just call it rock and roll?
Right.
And then the record company says, oh, great.
Right.
Then we don't have to call it R&B, we don't have to call it blues or black music.
Keep it segregated.
We'll call it rock and roll.
Well, R&B, though, the term, it was originally called race records. I don't know if you know that. So back in the day,
Right, we were
it was
relegated
called,
to
you know, so all the
recording
blues,
on race record
it was
labels.
all called race records. And a guy named Jerry Wexler, who was white, worked for Atlantic Records and stuff, he thought, well, you know, this stuff is selling, we can't call this race records anymore. And they came up with the rhythm and blues title. And the other thing that happened too is that, you know, all this stuff has to do with popularity and money and business.
Yeah.
So there used to be R&B stations, country stations. Now all of a sudden everybody was playing everything. So you could listen to WLS or WCFL, which were like basically like rock stations here in Chicago, but they played Sam Cooke, they played, you know, Sly and the Family Stone, and that's what really kind of brought, I think, the community together. All of a sudden they were hearing this mixture. I mean, I was playing today or yesterday in my class, Hello Dolly by Louis Armstrong. I mean, that was on the radio. So, and that knocked the Beatles off of #1, that one tune alone. And so it was possible to hear the Candyman and all this stuff along with the Jefferson Airplane. It was amazing times. And it really kind of opened up everybody that, wow, there's other stuff out there that's really
but there
Music was more
also,
diverse on the radio.
also situations where, and I was a program director way back in the day, and I recall when there was a record that was if you have a record that's #1 on the R&B chart and on the pop chart, on the top 40 chart, that's a record. There's not a lot of records that get to be #1 across the board back in the day. And this record was #1. Obviously, the two black stations in Chicago played it, station I was on, and also WVON. WLS would not, they put it on their list, but they didn't add it. The promotion guy, who I knew here in Chicago from Mercury Records, he said that they told him, yeah, it's #1, but we don't really need it. We don't have to have it on. And I think somebody from New York had to come in to get the record. This is a record #1 on both charts. This was Ohio Players' Fire. So it was still, disparities and some problems and issues, but Ramsey, I think you're generally right about that in terms of opening it up. I mean, for music that, like Earth, Wind, and Fire, and a lot of their songs had some great messages in them, and that sort of broke the doors down in terms of music being played. Want to talk a little bit about, in our remaining time, about now, about today, all right? Whole different situation. And I'd like your observations on that. I don't know how much you are aware of some of, what the current things are. Jay-Z had a Grammy-nominated album back in January called 444 that took a look at racism and the black experience in America. He had a track called The Story of O.J. Did you ever see that?
Oh, yeah.
With the animated stuff on it?
Yeah.
My son told me, Dad, you need to watch that,
Did you see it?
No.
Did you see it, Paul? Yeah.
If you're older and you have somebody in your family who's younger, that can be a good thing.
What was it?
It's the Jay-Z has a song, and he calls it
Story of O.J.
The Story of O.J. And it's animated. And
it was an animation.
The video was an animated thing.
And spoke to some issues.
Yes, it did.
But like, my overall question, though, is about Jay-Z and some other people who are doing some things. J. Cole is another artist who they're current artists today who are more hip-hop.
Current hip-hop artists. Right.
And the idea that today, are they connecting with this idea about, certainly police brutality is a major issue that they've done some recordings and touched on that. But what do you think about that today in terms of the music that they're putting out that does connect on some of these issues? Is that connecting with the people who listen to their music? We don't necessarily, maybe Maggie does because she's younger than we are, but what's happening with that? What is that music doing today? We've reflected on what the music we just talked about did in the past and from our time, but this is a different time and a different day. But there are problems still in relationship to social justice.
I don't know if music today, and you can speak to that, but I don't know if music today is really reaching out and pointing up social issues like music has in the past. I think the record companies have won out, that most of the records coming out today are about making love, and she left me, and I need her, and I miss her, and all that kind of stuff. And which is okay, because that's life too. But I think the record companies have won out in the fact that they're not putting out, and there used to be a whole line of folk records. If there weren't folk records on that label, there were records on that label that did talk about social issues. Well, I don't know if we have that anymore.
And there's Kendrick Lamar is great, and he's real popular, and he's done a lot of social justice things too. I just don't know It seems like the older stuff that we were talking about had a connection to the church. And I don't know if the new music has much connection to that anymore, if that makes sense. I don't hear a lot of like gospel influences. It sounds more mechanical, more machine-like, which is, again, part of society. I mean, music, a lot of times new music reflects the society it's in. And we're living in a computer age. We're living where everyone is isolated on their iPhones on the train. So the music kind of reflects that. So I don't know, as far as if older people listen to rap and hip hop, it sounds weird to them. I don't know if the stuff that we listened to when we were younger sounded weird to our grandparents or not.
You just opened up, I know we don't have time, we got to keep moving, but you opened up something about the church. Now, there's something right there. I mean, black churches aren't what they used to be. People are not attending.
Yeah.
I mean, almost every black church, almost every white church, whether it's Catholic, Methodist, Episcopal, whatever, complain about we're losing members. So society of today, people are just looking at themselves as who am I, what do I need, and not as what was the group doing? How are we what are we leaving here for our grandchildren? What are we leaving here as a group? I mean, look at our schools. They're coming back a little bit, but schools have gone through, well, I'm getting off on another train. So I didn't mean to do that. But you all know what I'm talking about.
So is there any, I mean, as you pointed out, it's not your thing, but Maggie can reflect on that in terms of the music that I mentioned and the people that are doing it. What kind of impact is that having on the whole issue, the same issues that we've been dealing with for a long time? Now there's an emphasis on police brutality. Black Lives Matter is very much out front, and there are some hip-hop artists that support that. We mentioned when we had the phone conversation about this, I don't know if you guys remember when at the Super Bowl, when Beyonce, was it 2 years ago?
Oh, when she came out.
Came out, she did the thing, and
put her fist up.
Rudy Giuliani went crazy, his head exploded.
He went crazy what?
Huh?
He went crazy what? Giuliani.
His head exploded.
And his head exploded. Yeah, boy, you talk about.
Because it was, I think it was very progressive of her to make. I mean, she's a big artist, and she's got, she can't financially, she can't get hit. But it was really great to see her take a stand, make a move, because she made a decision to step out there. And at Super Bowl halftime, there are a lot of people watching television. And so, your thoughts on that?
I mean, what's the problem with it?
Yeah. She did that, right? And they were dressed in black.
The fact that they felt so threatened by it is pretty amazing, really. No real thoughts. I really appreciate big artists, large artists who have a big following and are very influential, especially to our young people, to feel conscious. I just always have. I've just always felt like if you have people's attention and you've been gifted with talent and people are watching you and paying attention to what you're saying, you should have something to say that's positive, that's about a better way to live or something, And so that's just, I'm glad, that's the influence that I had, and feeling like, if you're intelligent enough and resourceful enough that you can do something to make things better, not just for yourself, but for the situation, and maybe wake up some people. Because it's better for the powers that be that seem so darn greedy to keep most people ignorant of the truth. And the whole thing is really not that complicated. But if we all feel divided by all the things that divide us, whether it's skin tone, hair, creed, where you grew up, neighborhood, city, whatever, education level, how you can dress, we're missing the point. No, not that we're missing the point. That is the point. They need us to be that way. Because otherwise, we could sing the same song and we wouldn't have to put up with this madness. Yeah.
What do you think about, as Ramsey pointed out, and as Paul was talking about, there was a definite influence from the church, especially from the black church back in the day. Most the larger percentage of black artists, performers, had a background somewhere back in there where church was part of it. I mean, there was, even if they didn't live that life later on, there was a spiritual basis somewhere in the background. And there are feelings today that even in the music and certainly with the music and the approach to the problems, like police brutality and some other things, that element of one's background is non-existent. You know, people don't, one of the things about the black church today is that young people really don't, I mean, I had to go to church. I don't know about you guys, but I mean, I'm old, but you know, I got that part. But I couldn't on Sunday, if I didn't go to Sunday school or church, one or the other, I couldn't go, you know, the Sunday thing back in the day was you go to the movies. So my mother said, well, if you can't go to church, then you certainly can't be well enough to go to the movies.
Go out playing, right.
So, I mean,
But that's serious. What you're saying right now is serious.
yes, oh yeah.
Because black society, when I was coming up, well, I had to go to church 3 or 4 times a week, especially after I started. Dad discovered that I could play gospel music when I was 9 years old. But I think we don't have that background in the black community anymore. You know, during church service, the preacher, before he started preaching, would touch on certain things in the community. Now, you all know you got to do this, that, and the other. In fact, let's have a second collection because sister this and sister that, or some problem coming up, we got to raise money for that. The church was city hall for black people. And for whatever the reason, church became blasé. I don't go to church, what is, and I think it's a loss for us, especially for black people, because we still need our city hall. Because all the city halls across the United States, they're not speaking for us.
Right.
There's issues on the south side of Chicago, west side of Chicago that needs to be spoken to. Don't let me get started.
Just have questions.
You know, I recall I interviewed Chuck D one time from Public Enemy. And one of the things that he talked about was, we talked about a lot of things, but he had made a statement about we shall overcome, and he essentially was saying that, you know, like, yeah, that day is over. I mean, his approach to it, I mean, he was taking a new approach in terms of, you know, dealing with social issues in terms of what Public Enemy, the rap group, was doing. But maybe because I'm older, I took a little offense to just sort of wiping that away, you know, about we shall overcome. That was the background. Anybody want to answer that?
She's working on it.
I guess not.
She didn't mean it. It's okay.
Party's on. So, you know, Ramsey, in terms of that relationship to the church and all the things that go with that, and just the upbringing and all of that, and I don't know what Chuck D's upbringing was, but I was a little offended at his, I understand that things have to move on and that, you know, things progress, but it was, to me, sort of the total dismissal of all that took place before Public Enemy. I mean, in terms of getting us to where we are from point A to point B, people did a lot of sacrificing. Yeah, they did a lot of singing, yeah.
I bet part of the thing that he didn't like was someday. That whole like, oh, someday we'll get it, oh, someday. Nope, I think it was more like, we're not waiting no more. It's time to get it now.
Right. Yeah. I get that. Mm-hmm. So, well, let me give you a quick story about it. I read about this incident and I thought it was interesting. This happened, I think, in 2016. J. Cole, who is another hip-hop rap artist, had a platinum album in 2016 called For Your Eyes Only, right?
Oh, that one.
There's a track called Neighbors, which is inspired by Ramsey, a real event. According to his producer, J. Cole said that his neighbors racially profiled him and assumed he was selling drugs from a house that he rented in an upscale area in North Carolina. The neighbors, because he had rented this house and he was using it as studio space to do some work, recording and all of that. And so I guess neighbors saw the brothers coming in and out, and they thought it was a dope house, and so they called the police, and a SWAT team came to the house while they were out of town when J. Cole was out of town when the SWAT team came. But the bottom line is a SWAT team came and descended upon the house. So some of the issues have changed in terms of somewhat in terms of content, but the issues about race, racism, profiling, and all of that is still real. And he responded by doing a track called Neighbors on his platinum-selling recording. So there is, my point is, there's an effort to connect the reality of what's happening today with this music, you know. And sometimes it's hard for me because it's not, you know, it's not my music, and so I have to think for a minute, you know, let me back up and retract this because it's not something that, or recalculate this because it's not my music. I might miss the fact that this is being done. That's the point I'm making. See what I'm saying, Paul?
No, I saw that he did a video on that too. I think, you know, just in general, people are just so disconnected. And, you know, even if you take the train, if everyone's got their iPods on or, you know, their iPhones, sometimes when, you know, things have happened on the train, everyone takes them out and they start talking. It's amazing, the communicate, and all of a sudden people just start talking to each other. And it used to be like that.
Hello.
And music used to be like that too. Music used to be about musicians getting together to make the whole thing sound good. Now it's about me, like, you know, look at me, how great. I think we've really lost the connection that we're part of this thing. I mean, air is not invisible. Just the hurricane coming at North Carolina, you can tell that air is not nothing. So I think we just have to get back to the point where we actually just talk and communicate and understand that being different is actually okay. And you can expand yourself by learning about something that's different as opposed to staying stuck in your own little world.
Yes.
We have about 10 minutes left. I want to open it to the audience, but I do want to reflect on what you said a minute ago. And one of the musicians who really, for his time, he really took a step in terms of opening it up and including everybody, and that was Sly Stone. Because his group had everybody it was everybody from everywhere in the group. And you know, his whole approach to that. And he was out of San Francisco at the time, a little more open in the thinking. But that was a major step. Because he said there were some places they went to play, and they said, oh, no, we can't, oh, no. So there are people who stood out in terms of what they did more than, you know, the hit record, we thought about that was good. But when he wrote things like Everyday People and Stand, they were specific messages in that music addressing those issues.
Thank you for letting me be myself, that one.
Thank you for letting me be myself. Again.
Again, right.
Okay, so we're gonna, I don't know how we're gonna do this. We're gonna open it up.
There's a mic back there on our right.
Here have a
On your
microphone
right.
that they're
over
gonna...
there, right.
Oh, she's got the microphone.
And on the left. Okay, great.
Okay, and there's one over here too?
Okay.
Okay, it's cool. If you have a question or comment, raise your hand and the lady will come up with the microphone and you'll be on.
Hello, and much respect to the panel. I'm a former Chicago public school teacher, taught on the south and west sides, and I saw the dissipation of the church and its impact on the communities. But something that's even greater, I think, is the closing of the schools by our mayors and the lack of funding for our music and our arts programs for our youth. I think that's done a great disservice and emotional harm to our kids.
That's right.
So if you'd like to speak to that.
Well, I'd like to say one thing. Okay, there's nothing wrong with sports, but in all sports, there's always a winner and a loser.
Right. With music,
Think about that.
like
In music, there's no winner. Everybody wins. It's working together to make whatever successful, and everybody that's part of it is successful. And if the audience gets it, they're successful too. So I always think it's so strange to think that sports, for some reason, is overlooked past the arts, which is really talking about culture.
Yeah.
I went to Wells High School. Wells High School on Ashland and Oak Street and goes all the way out to Ashland. Changed the name out there. And had, what's that?
Augusta.
Augusta. And it was just middle and low income people out there. Started to be integrated, but the point I'm trying to make is that school had, building on her comment, hello, am I there? Had symphony orchestra, had dance band, had a jazz band, had ballet, had industrial arts, had creative arts. Can't remember all the things we had. And once a year, the kids put on a musical in the fall using all these various departments. The biggest point I want to make, there were a lot of kids, especially guys, that came to school because they wanted to be a part of that action. But you had to keep a C average. If you don't have a C average, you can't participate in this activity. And when they took music out of the schools, we didn't learn anything from the Greeks. The Greeks not only said reading, writing, and arithmetic, geometry, but the Greeks were as heavy into the arts as they were into these other food for the brain. And so, there you go.
I was in the band at Parker High School. I was terrible. I was in third clarinet section.
Third.
Anybody else?
Hi,
Okay.
I'm Heather Dalmage from Roosevelt University. And so I'm going in another direction here, even though I'm loving this discussion. So Kanye West. You know, throughout history, it seems, of black culture in the United States, co-optation has happened over and over and over again. And then there's also complicity, right? And so Kanye is, it's complex for sure, but I'm just wondering if you all could talk about black music and co-optation and complicity, even music that was created as a form of resistance, being co-opted and sold back.
It's always been I mean, in studying the history of African American music to put together the script for Legacy show, which I do. I mean, even in the days of Scott Joplin, in terms of he didn't own the printing press. So he had the talent and had the music, and then there was the audience, but in order for him to get at least the printed version to that audience, it required that middleman, and that middleman wasn't fair and wasn't trying to cut him into the lion's share of what he created. And it hasn't really changed all that much, you know, as far as what the record labels or the people that distribute have control of the channels of distribution and promotion and marketing, keeping more of what's created. So even to the point of, there's something called, that book is called Uncle Tom. And yeah, there's something that Tom Burrell wrote. And then there's this other book, and it just talks about how there were people who invested in those rappers early on, because at first rapping was more of the, it's kind of coming out of the Panther movement and just black liberation movement and speaking toward us being more self-sufficient and so forth. But then, and there were those who early on, Public Enemy, Arrested Development, that had more of a message in the music, a message that was more positive, and yes, in some cases nationalistic. But I'm saying the money's investment was from very big corporations, was put into the ones that would say stuff like, I'm gonna pop that nigga with my gat because he's a punk. You know, that's what they invested in. Or I'm gonna bend that, you know, just the horrible stuff that they started allowing to be acceptable. Sometimes it's quite a smack in the face when I think of how they could say that Oscar Brown Jr. was too outspoken back in the day. And therefore, you know, had to remove the little Lone Ranger song out the radio station, or, you know, didn't want him saying things like the things that Ali was on Broadway in a play, singing things like a song called Black Balloons and We Came in Chains and It's All Over Now, Mighty Whitey, in terms of the control of our minds and condition. And so, yes, it's really rough that this stuff can be said, that, you know, I have to guard my own ears, much less my young people, much less any elders, don't even need to be hearing this stuff. Now, how did they get record deals? How is that popular? How is that hitting the charts? It's not by an accident. It's not by an accident that people with a message and an uplifting, helpful thing don't get deals, don't get distribution. The good news is internet. You don't need the middleman. You got to go straight to your audience, though.
Times have changed. By the way, one of the early investors in rap, and especially gangster rap, was
Marshall Field.
Marshall Field.
Oh,
right.
come on now. Marshall Field's big corporations that we've all supported through the years. Chase, I'm sure J.P. Morgan, all of them. Come on now. Yeah, all of them.
One of the young Marshall Field, he had the fourth or something. He had, everybody got X amount of money to make your way, whatever you want to do with it. He chose, okay, this looks good. I'm going to do this. He made a lot of money. He made an awful lot of money.
People that have a stake also not only in the people that create misogynistic, murderous music, they have a stake not only in those record labels that put that kind of music out, but they will have a stake in the penal institution, prison system, that actually incarcerates them. And so it's almost like they're going to win either way, whether they criminalize them in the music or they become, locked up for the criminal activity that they're purporting is the way to live. Popping bottles and slinging dollars and chicks naked. That's not a good lifestyle. That ends quick. But there's a lot of young people being sent off into thinking that's what a good life should be, and that's success. And it ain't by an accident.
Okay, next.
I just want to say in terms of jazz music, Jasmia Horn does very political music, and she's going to be at the Logan Center in November.
Yes,
and so if you want to hear how someone interprets music and makes it her own, you should hear that. And then I also want to just say I just heard Jasmia Horn.
Jasmia Horn. She's originally from Texas, moved to New York, and I think this is the first time she's appearing in Chicago. She kicks off the jazz series at Logan Center this fall.
And then I want to just say, in terms of political music, I just want to hear Dave Alvin and Jimmy Dale Gilmore play at Fitzgerald's, and they ended with Down by the Riverside after an amazing show that had both the political and the rockabilly and the blues. And so someone said to me when she was 50, I just go back to liking the music that I liked when I was 13. And sometimes that, knowing the new music is kind of hard as you get older because you're not listening to the radio as much or the internet now. So you kind of get into the music that you are now and that you don't necessarily, unless you have kids or really hanging around a total music scene, it's hard to hear all the new music that comes out and really know what's going on in terms of what's political or not political and what songs really make people happy. And take the song, that Farrell did, and Happy Song, and everybody was playing that and doing their interpretation.
Oh, yeah, that was cool. The way everybody made an interpretation of his song.
Good point.
Yeah, that was kind of cool.
Next.
Thank you. Good afternoon to the panel. My question is, what do you think can be done to lessen the gap between the generations involved in music so that you can have young people such as myself or younger or older that could talk about Billie Holiday and Sade and Whitney Houston and India.Arie and there's not a disconnect? What can we do to lessen the gap?
I'm gonna let somebody else, but you said India and those people. No, it's the fact that we can't it doesn't seem like Rihanna belongs in the conversation, or, does Beyonce sometimes, because you named all kind of conscious more than, those artists that you named. But yes, it is about how can we all enjoy what the older bring it forward instead of feeling like we have to just leave it behind. I often ask that question.
Well, I don't know, does anybody here have that answer? We look to the wise ones for the answer about connecting. How do we make that? The lady was asking, how do we make that connection sort of open the door for a younger generation to understand what?
Well, that's the point I was trying to make earlier.
And for us to understand
in the public school
the other
system,
way.
in the public school system, that was one of the things that happened. One of the classes that you had to take, who's who now and who was before this one, and where is jazz now, and who is Ella Fitzgerald, who's Billie Holiday, who is Charlie Parker. Not that you're supposed to sing a Charlie Parker solo or anything, but you had to know something about Duke Ellington. You had to know something about Count Basie. This is Wells High School. You also had to know something about Beethoven, and you had to know something about Chopin, even though you didn't play an instrument. At that time, music and the arts was important in the public school system because citizens wanted it there. And when the politician says we can't afford it to be there, the citizens said, we want it there. Citizens today stood by and said, okay, I got to go to work right now. I'll call you back. You know. And so the kids growing up today, they didn't hear it at home. Now these kids are grown up. They're grown up. They haven't heard about Billie Holiday. And now their kids don't know who Billie Holiday and Charlie Parker and Duke Ellington.
So it skipped over those.
Yeah, much less Beethoven and Chopin. And I'm talking about Wells High School.
Sure.
Hello. And when you all leave here, what you gonna do? You know what I'm saying?
So it would be not a matter of economic expediency, but cultural enrichment.
There you go.
Cultural enrichment over economic expediency.
And talk to your politicians, your local politicians, your politicians downtown. What do you want in your neighborhood schools? What do you want? What do you want your kids to hear? You better believe they better get algebra and geometry right, but to balance that off, shouldn't they have girls' chorus, boys' choir? I know in some schools they are bringing it back in, so it's not all over now, as it used to be a few years ago. But there's got to be a balance.
I think we're just about out of time. Can we take one more question? And that's it? One more.
Somebody get him.
Just throw the microphone.
Thank you. It's so nice to be here, and I appreciate everything that's been said. Piggyback on this young lady, my family has been in music all their lives. So it grew up. My daughter now homeschools her children, and that's one of the key things. She's part of a musical group. So they make sure that the music from the past continues on. So as you said, if it's not in the public school system, you have to have it in your home.
There you go.
So you have to maintain a stability in order for this to continue to grow. If you don't have time, you got to go to work, but make sure when you get home, you've got the music on, you've got it playing, you've got education, you have a broad sense of all that's going on.
Living in Chicago, that's great. Living in Chicago, there's a lot you have access to, just in terms of cultural enrichment, different kinds of music, and types of soulful music being played in places where it's much more natural. And what we're speaking of, Yes, indeed, I agree. WBZ and TTW help a lot, don't they? The gentleman with the curly hair, yeah, he wants to get in the center, post center.
And that will be
That's our last.
That will be the last comment. Okay.
I'll be quick. Hi. I've very much enjoyed the panel. I was just wondering if you were familiar with Chance the Rapper or Childish Gambino,
Oh, yeah.
who are artists who seem to address a few of your grievances with modern music.
You said, what about the grievances? You said, are we familiar with Chance and Gambino?
They seem to address a few of your grievances with modern music.
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
Ooh, go ahead, somebody else first.
Those are two very prominent rappers who, Chance the Rapper, especially with his involvement with the education system here in Chicago, trying to make things better. And Ramsey, I agree, 100% in terms of music in the schools. It's just awful when music was taken out of the schools. That just was just an awful decision. Listen, we're going to wrap this up. We've enjoyed this tremendously, and I want to thank you all for being here today. Maggie Brown.
Thank you.
Ramsey Lewis. Paul Wertico. I'm Richard Steele. Thank you so much. Appreciate it.